Hello and welcome to Faith Talks. In today's program, we'll be discussing fundamentalism and faith. Joining me in the studio and ready to share their views and comments are Sinisha Horvath and Douglas McCormack. Before we get into more of the discussions around faith and fundamentalism, perhaps it might be helpful to just identify what does fundamentalism actually mean, Doug?
Yeah, well, I think in modern times, it's very much taken on as an adjective for extremist views in various guises. But actually, it goes back quite some time and comes from really a description of not early Christianity, but late 1800s Christianity, when it was reacting to what was essentially, I suppose, new liberal and modernist views of interpretation of Scripture. And so they basically came out with these five stances in regards to Scripture, in regards to the virgin birth, in regards to the resurrection and the atonement of Jesus Christ. And these became the stalwarts or views of fundamental Christianity.
But what Douglas is saying is it's been seen today more as extremism, because most churches will have some fundamentalistic background in their way they do church. But that extremism that Doug is mentioning, is that something that we are seeing in churches today?
Yes, I think there is hardly any denomination that experience some form of fundamentalism. But then again, as Doug mentioned, fundamentalism is a word that has evolved, like a word gay. It means something completely different, where before it was a reaction to influx of liberalism and just biblical criticism. Today it has become a synonym for not just religious extremism, but also for secular extremism. You can be a secular fundamentalist as well. But every church has them, but the problem is that the fundamentalism is always in the eye of the beholder. We always think of the other experiencing or becoming a part of the fundamentalist spectrum. But I think that every church, every denomination, every religion has their own fundamentalists in the terms that we are discussing today.
I think that's very interesting what you're bringing up, Sinisha, because you're actually saying that churches have fundamentalism within them as well, but we are often quicker to look at other religions and point to them. Is that something you find as well, Douglas?
I think, when you look at the early roots of what it meant to be a fundamentalist, certainly as a fundamentalist Christian, it was about defending certain basic Christian beliefs. And so, I think when we look at it today, of course, we associate it with more of the extreme views. In fact, it's very different from its early roots within the Christian church. And so it takes on, I suppose, a new guise. And actually we see it more as dangerous rather than as a defense or a reaction to these liberal views. We see it more as a danger to actually the very things it was started to defend.
I think you're kind of alluding to that we might see it more as a threat today as well, fundamentalism, whereas the origin of the word fundamentalism and how it was seen in the beginning was not a threat, but just a reaction to the status in the churches.
It was seen as being defending basic Christian beliefs. And so, but whereas we don't see it that now, we see it more as a threat to those very beliefs that it was seeking to defend.
I think today we make a distinction. We don't use the word fundamentalist because we are all fundamentalists in a way because we believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's one of the things that were in the tenets of the first fundamentalists. But today we have adjusted the term. So we say we have a fundamental beliefs. And I think that's different from being a fundamentalist, as we understand today. Fundamentalist we associate with extremist, with religious extremism, but to have a fundamentals means that you adhere to the orthodoxy, to the values more keen to the biblical teachings. So we have adjusted, and we have now the word fundamentals as opposed to fundamentalist.
Yet most Christians or most people of faith would not identify themselves with being a fundamentalist. The views we see in the media, how the word is used, has helped it being evolved. So we're looking more on the extremism of people of faith.
Yeah, I think if you were to maybe the the kinds of people that they would think of, or the types of groups of people. When they're thinking of fundamentalists, they might think of someone like David Koresh in Waco, or the Westboro Baptist Church, and the types of things that they stand for. That Westboro's anti-gay stance, it's anti. I think they also picketed servicemen's funerals. Yet the pastor kept a gun in his top drawer. The type of people that that pop into your mind, that when you think of the idea of a fundamentalist Christian, are really, it's something that's on the fringe. It's not in the mainstream. Whereas, of course, in the early days, it was about bringing it back to the mainstream. This is what Christianity stands for. We believe in the Bible. We believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We believe in the virgin birth. Whereas it's gone very much from the mainstream to the fringes of Christianity and to the fringe of society.
But then, you are both pastors in various denominations. You come from different backgrounds. Do you see fundamentalism or this kind of flirting with extremism in a regular church out in leafy Berkshire, or if it being down on the south coast? And is that not something we see more as inner city core expression of faith?
I think we are struggling sometimes to understand the causes of, now as we talk about religious extremism or fundamentalism. And a lot to do comes down to the insecurities that we experience. Fundamentalism provides that sense of security. It draws the boundaries, and many people find it soothing and comforting. So if you tend to be an insecure person, if your faith is kind of shaky, you like someone to come and draw you the line, and that's the quality that appeals to many people, whether you are coming from any background, whether you are coming from Islam, if you come from Christianity, or even from a secular background. People like certainties, people like boundaries, and fundamentalism offers that. And the problem is that because you feel insecure, you cling on with all your heart to that structure that was provided to you, and that causes you to become a little bit complicated as the life goes on. So there is no really a geographical place where the fundamentalism would thrive. It can thrive anywhere. It really depends how you feel about your religion, how at ease you feel with the world around you. That will determine which way you will go.
If you're saying it's not really where you live, is it your education? Is it your emotional state of being? Or what draws people to being more, if we can say, extreme fundamentalists?
Well, it can be, as I first said, insecurity. How the insecurity comes? Sometimes you find yourself in transition. People who tend to like conspiracy theories, or people who like to cling on, have experienced some traumas. It might be something in a childhood, or they're just being caught in a marriage collapses. So people feel hurt, and they like to cling on something. So that can be just simply psychological things. The other thing could be the lack of education. Many Christians profess to be the ardent followers and the students of the Bible, but many don't read the Bible, and they come, especially today in the age of internet, probably also fuels a little bit of that fundamentalism, because there's so many choices and options that just confuses people. So people then tend to latch on to some view that is often very extremist, and I think that's also contributes to the rise of fundamentalism as we see in the news today.
Doug, do you see there is a rise in fundamentalism?
I think, for me, when I look at the world, and particularly, when you look at the last 5-6 years, there's been a lot of uncertainty. There's been issues with the financial markets. The geopolitical situations have shifted so much, in the last 5-6 years. And I think fundamentalism, in all its forms, actually, it seeks to answer questions. People want to know why things are the way they are. There's no grey areas in fundamentalism. It's black and white. It's right. It's wrong. It's a yes and a no. And that's what it offers people. And so when you have all these shifts at every level of society happening over these last few years, I think people are attracted to that certainty that fundamentalism offers, and that assurance that actually, things are happening a certain way because of greed, capitalism, whatever it is. They'll offer a solution, and they say, well, if we change that, then actually, we will reach some form of stability and hope, I suppose.
But as you as pastors, are you not giving that assurance in a regularly middle-of-the-road church?
Well, I think the Christian message is one of hope. It's one of assurance. Christ says, I've come to seek and save the lost, of which we're all a part of that group. And so the message of the Scriptures is very much one of hope and certainty, and actually answers many of the questions that. But when you look at some of those answers, some people feel that actually, it doesn't fit for my worldview, and so they look for answers to those questions in a different place, and it may very well be in Scripture, but a different part of Scripture, and they'll interpret it in a way that actually, I want to take this to a different level. So the gift of salvation, it's something that Christ offers to all of us. Now, and it's offered freely. A fundamentalist may very well turn around and say, well, yes, it is offered freely, but I have to live my life by a set of rules. And unless I live that set of rules perfectly, well, then, that grace won't be fulfilled completely in my life.
And that's exactly the problem. I like the quote from Martel, who wrote Life of Pi. He said that fanatics, but you can put fundamentalists here, they don't have faith, they have beliefs. They cling on them rather than on faith, which means, I think this is a lesson that I think we need to. Christianity is not about theories. It's not about the structures in the form of doctrines. It is about relationship. And I think this is the key. People are often hurt in their relationships, and that's why they go and go for the abstract structure. But I think that real Christianity talks about relationships. And here we find safety. This is why we feel safe at home. This is why we feel safe at our families. Nothing can shake me there. If you base your religion on the faith, meaning the deep inner trust that you have with people, nothing will shake you off. I mean, you can talk about my father, my earthly father. You can say anything you want. You can say he's drunk, he messed you up or anything. But that doesn't change anything. You cannot shake me. He is my father. Nothing will change. But if you have a different approach, you will always be scared, always be in trouble, always be prone to be, going to the extremes of one sort or another.
But are there some religions or some faith groups that are more prone to that extremism that we today in the media call fundamentalism? Are there, you're looking at mainstream Christian churches, there doesn't seem to be an appeal for many of them, but you're looking at smaller, more traditional church groups, such as ourselves, as an Adventist church. There seems to be something, is there something in our heritage that makes people go more extreme?
I think history is littered with groups who have taken what has been mainstream and turned it into something extreme. The Jews had the Zealots. Christianity has had no ends of groups. The group that went out into Jonesboro,
yes.
The group that went out and eventually committed the mass suicide. Right up to when they had the millennium. People were being refused entry into Israel because people were going there thinking that something special was going to happen, and so there is this so I don't think any group is immune from it, but I think I suppose when you take a stance or a stand on certain things, on Scripture, on certain beliefs regarding sexuality, regarding the second coming of Christ, how the world end events. There may be people who are attracted, whether through conspiracy theories, who want to take what are mainstream views and take them maybe to some sort of, well, a logical conclusion or illogical conclusion that puts them on the fringe and puts them within this category of extremist.
With the media we talked about a little bit earlier, there seems to be, particularly with the internet, you mentioned that people are getting a lot of interesting views from the internet as well. And at the same time, we're seeing a very militaristic attitude online in social media from more fundamentalistic, extremist faith individuals. Do you think that the media then actually accelerate people into a stronger extremism?
Oh, certainly. We talk about the institutions. I mean, Catholics have their extremists as well. But because it's such a big organization, it's kind of easily neglect or put aside, ignored, where the smaller religious groups might have one instance which kind of blows into proportion. So the media certainly amplify those news, and I think in some way contribute potentially to it, unintentionally, I guess. But I would just like to say, I don't know, haven't seen the data which suggests that some is prone, but there is a lot of contributing factors. Now, we come to Islam, and obviously we want to touch that a little bit. Poverty is often driving people. Despair. You mentioned the inner city. If you have no prospects for finding a job, to advance your career, to live life, I mean, you have a explosion of population in the Middle East. We don't know that, but 40 years ago there were but a tenth of population. So you have now countries like Egypt, I don't know how many, 70, 80 millions, maybe more, people living on a strip of land that is just a couple of dozens of miles wide, with 90% of people under the age of, 40. They know that they don't have any prospects of living like people in the West. And what do you turn to? You turn to the prophets who promise things, and this is how it happens. So there are many factors, and the church might just happen to be in one of those situations, as you mentioned, the inner city, or maybe somewhere in extreme poverty, that will contribute to the rise of fundamentalism.
But how do you, as a pastor in your local churches, how do you engage with somebody in your congregation? And I'm not talking about anybody specifically, I'm just saying, how do you deal with that extremism when it comes into your door?
Well, I had the situation where the young people in the discussion group, they approached me and we discussed, and they admired, to some extent, the faith they mentioned of those suicide bombers. So they say, you cannot deny, we disagree, of course, but they were impressed by the display of faith that these suicide bombers did, and it horrified me, of course. But then I tried to explain to them that has nothing to do with faith. It has all to do with insecurities. It's almost like a child that has been abused. If your father beats you all the time, and you always try to come, Daddy, did I do it right? Did I do it okay? People do things for their God because they are not sure whether they are loved. They are not sure whether they are in favor of God. So our task is really to preach that gospel of love to them, to make them feel that they are valued, they are secure, that there is someone who is deeply interested in them. And then this relationship business to grow, that helps people to feel secure, stable, and ultimately growing into a human beings full of faith and grace.
What about you, Douglas? How do you deal with when you're sensing extremism coming to your door? I mean, we know that some of our young people go into more extreme views, but we also know that they are fed by our generation of extremists. So it's not just a youth thing. But how do you deal with that? How do you help a person?
I think you have to accept people where they're at. And in many ways, it comes back down to that relationship, to that love. And you can't fake it. So you can't. It has to be genuine. It has to be real. And and that's what you see Jesus doing throughout his entire ministry. People that in many ways, people who were seen as the fundamentalists, who were seen as the guardians of Scripture and theology, who were trying to keep themselves pure and aloof. Jesus came and actually said, that's not the way I taught you to do it. You have to make, and of course they accused him, here's this guy who mixes with harlots and sinners, I think the King James says, describes it. This was Jesus was a person who mixed with people. He ate with people. He drank with people. It didn't matter what their background was. The Samaritan woman at the well. It wasn't okay for a man to talk to a woman. Full stop. It wasn't okay for a Jew to talk to a Samaritan. And here is Jesus, a man talking to a woman, but also a Jew talking to a Samaritan. And so there's all these strikes against him, not to communicate with this person, but he takes the gospel to her. He takes what the Bible calls the water of life, that hope and that assurance that comes in knowing the Messiah, Jesus Christ, and says, well, actually, do you know what? This is the well you want to drink from, not that well that has water in it, but I am the well. You drink from me, and you will have all that you need.
Yeah, and I think just something that you mentioned about Jesus, I think it starts also with us, because it's difficult to love these people. They can be quite obnoxious, and I think I have a great sympathy for them, because there is a lot of things that trouble them. And I said, we started with insecurities. And I think on our part, it has to take acknowledgement. We often see it, we just kind of are tired of that, of these type of people. But really, it starts on our part to try to understand, to immerse into their, to try to understand how they think and what bothers them. And then you see the broken people often, people who really try to do hard. They wish best often for themselves and others in their own way. I think this is where you start, just like Jesus, go to them, love them, and that's the beginning of helping them out.
And that is beautiful, and that is what we should be doing. But surely it must be frustrating. I'll just challenge you a little bit. When you have people who have such extreme views that are actually contrary to Scripture, and then they are very vocal and seemingly angrily vocal and messing up in your church, seducing the young people's mind, splitting the older folks into groups. How do you as a leader in the church deal with that? It's all very well to love, but is that enough?
But I think that's really the crux. I have a couple of friends that I would regard to have a fundamentalist views. And their expectation of me as a pastor is to kind of be even more fundamentalist than them. But I realize that I cannot argue with them. I realize that I cannot present to them, look, this is it, Bible says this. It just won't work for them. But what works is when you try to understand that despite disagreements, despite everything, that you appreciate them, that you are listening to them. And I'm proud to say that I have few people, quite a few of those people who I would regard as having a fundamentalist view, that we have quite a cozy, loving relationship. And they are happy to accept me. They might see me as just as I see them, as progressive, as too liberal or anything, but they seem to be happy in my company. I think that's a good way, and probably the only way. It's all coming down to relationships.
And it is coming down to relationships, but perhaps also to balance, and that there is space within our faith communities to hold a more fundamentalistic view and at the same time have a more loving relationship. That those are not necessarily oppositions, but when we go into an extreme view on either side of that can cause challenges. I don't know what you think, Doug.
I think, how we relate to people, how we deal with people. Fundamentalists, extremists on the one hand, mainstream, I don't know how you want to describe it on the other hand, often come to blows. Each is trying to understand the other. And it doesn't change overnight. There is a certain element of urgency, but it requires a lot of patience. It requires trying to get into somebody else's head. Like Sinisha said, we're all broken people at one level or another. And actually, sometimes we use fundamentalist beliefs to try and hide and to hide that brokenness. And I think when we get, and of course it's only through those loving relationships, actually spending time, patiently listening, trying to seek to see where they're coming from, that you get inside their head, they get inside yours. You try and get some sort of, I don't know, understanding's probably not where you want to be, but certainly to a place where actually, Christianity is about a person. It's not about. It's not ultimately about a set of beliefs. It's about the person of Jesus Christ. And if my interpretation of those beliefs actually pushes Jesus Christ out of the picture or complete, just off to the side altogether, you're trying to draw them back to that center person, that center place, where actually we interpret our worldview, we interpret our political views around this person of Jesus Christ, because that's where Scripture brings us the whole time. It's about bringing. So whether you're a fundamentalist and so even in Jesus' ministry, you see him bringing back to himself. The Pharisees, the Sadducees. He's always trying to bring them back. The Samaritan woman. He's trying to bring her to that place where she gets to know Jesus Christ. And that's what we're seeking to do when we engage with anybody, whether it's someone who's a fundamentalist or a secular person. We want to bring them into a place where they actually begin to know who this person Jesus Christ is.
I think that wraps up our discussion really nicely, with focusing on the centrality of Jesus Christ in our faith and the hope that actually gives all of us. So thank you very much, Douglas and Sinisha, for coming into the studio today. And why not add your voice to the debate by joining us on our Facebook page at Faith Talks. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.